First of all, I want to thank Commerce Next for having me here. My name is Melissa Campanelli, and I'm the co-founder of the Women in Retail Leadership Circle, and I'm also the brand and content director for Total Retail. And we have a great partnership with Commerce Next, and we're so happy to be here today. And as Veronica mentioned, this panel is going to be all about marketing and merchandising in post-recessionary times. Let's face it, we are kind of having those right now. So before we get started, with some of the questions that we've talked about, I'd love to just have everybody on the panel introduce themselves. So Mike, why don't we start with you? See you there on the screen so you can kind of jump in.
Sure. My name is Mike Lackman. I'm the CEO of Trade Coffee, which is a marketplace of the country's best craft roasted coffees. We use personalization to curate subscriptions where our country's best roasters ship coffee made on demand to houses all over the country. And we've been really busy helping them access their consumers at a time when many of their shops are closed because of the pandemic.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much. Courtney, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Thanks, Melissa. I'm Courtney Shaffer Lovold. I'm the Director of Client Success at Emarsys. Emarsys is an omni-channel customer engagement platform, and just happy to talk to you today a little bit about what we've been working on with our customers, as well as some practices we've taken on as a business just to support retail and e-commerce in a better capacity.
Perfect, great. Yeah, I'm excited to hear about some of your, what you're working on with some of your customers, some of your retail customers. And Stephen, why don't you jump in?
Sure. So I'm Stephen Tristan Young. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of Poshmark, a social commerce marketplace of over 60 million shoppers and sellers. We're a community-first tech platform and have been pioneering social commerce as a new form of buying and selling online, as well as customers engaging with each other.
Perfect. Let's see. We did have another panelist that was going to join us, Shawuan from Tommy Hilfiger, and I think she's having some trouble joining. So I think I'm just going to get started, if that's okay with everybody. So the first question I wanted to talk about was consumer buying behavior. So, we all know that it's being influenced by social distancing, but is there any other type of buying behavior that you've noticed right now during the current recession that was similar to what was happening in the 2007 to 2009 recession? So can you kind of draw any comparisons there? And I think Mike, you wanted to comment there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard to completely dissociate it from the social distancing because that is a big part of what's different. What we're seeing is a very different sort of compartmentalization or bifurcation in the eyes of the consumer about where they're willing to spend more money. Mm-hmm. And so even as recently as 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was some work that came out by McKinsey that suggested that in almost every category, net expectations of spend between July and August were going to be down by pretty considerable amounts. But a couple categories like home healthcare products, grocery, essentials, actually saw consumers expecting to spend more in those categories. And so I think versus a time when people psychologically wanted to save writ large, which is how we interpreted things when I was in the pet industry and the industrial supplies industry going back in the late aughts, 10 years ago or so, here it seems like you kind of have to decide, are customers trying to find a way to save money, in which case accelerating sales probably needs to be attributable to markdowns, versus our customers trying to spend more money better. And I think both of those behaviors are happening, and you kind of have to decide which customer you're catering to or which category you're selling into in that regard.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, consumers and how much money they have to spend right now. Yeah. Courtney, did you want to jump in there as well? Maybe some of your customers, you saw some similarities?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Mike just said, and we're seeing the exact same thing. Is it a shift of not spending or just deciding where we're going to spend money? Some of our customers in the outdoor brand space or digital experiences or home goods or DIYs, we're actually seeing record-setting numbers, right? Because the difference is we can't separate the stay at home from the state of the world, right? And so the stay at home did force a lot of the consumer behavior to figure out, well, what are we going to do if we only can go to our backyard? And we had a bike customer that had set 10-year records in the spring just of being able to sell those and outdoor camping gear. So I do think we're going to continue to see different pivots, but there are certain areas in which we saw thriving because people were spending the money that they had to be able to have this new life while they were at home.
Yes, Stephen, I see you're shaking your head in agreement. Do you have anything you want to add there?
No, especially I would say for our platform where, we focus a lot on basically items that are new with tags or gently worn resale goods. There's been a lot more of an openness to that, especially I think because one, to what the other panelists had mentioned, people are just much more mindful of spending. What we've noticed is that more people are willing to buy more items at a slightly cheaper cost than say buying on one large item, which I think speaks to sort of the need to actually spend. So sort of continue to kind of use the income you have, but do it in a really smart way. And for us, I think what trends that we normally probably would have seen as far as, okay, people buying spring goods, people buying for the summer have just kind of upended because people are buying more homeware. People are trying to recreate things in their home. We have a whole home category where people are buying lights and decorations, trying to recreate in their own backyards experiences that they would normally get elsewhere. So I think it's really fascinating that even right now, we're supposed to be in back to school, but if people aren't going back to school, what are they going to be buying, right? So traditional sort of, I would say, retail pillars are kind of being upended. And even looking at our platform where consumer first data is telling us, hey, you know what, tie-dye is going to be really big this summer. We had a huge uptick on that. And it's something that we didn't find initially interesting, but then when we start like the number of sales happening, it's like, hey, it's saying something about how consumers are behaving and what they're looking for. So it's kind of following what people are looking at versus normally what retail says is like, this is what you must want and this is what you must buy. It's really interesting to see the trends that are on our platform.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. So it's almost like the consumer dictating sort of the merchandising or yeah. That's really interesting. And yeah. Is that something that you notice happening in the 2007 timeframe as well?
I mean, I think it's harder back then because most of like a fashion marketplace like Poshmark at that time probably wasn't existing, right? But however, you probably saw some of that happening because TJ Maxx and Ross and Marshalls were around. But in this time, all those stores that normally would have probably benefited were all closed. So I think people still looking for the kind of products you would buy at those stores they were looking for on our platforms and other similar resale platforms.
Mm-hmm. True. So let's talk a little bit about marketing messages. I'm going to jump ahead here. Courtney, have any of your customers discussed how their marketing messages have changed when the pandemic began? And also, what I find interesting too, have they changed over the last few months? Maybe gone in a different direction?
Absolutely. I think what we clung to right at the beginning with our customers is that if we don't get comfortable that everything is going to change beyond our control, we're going to miss out, right? And so we really set down the expectation that we were planning for next week, next month, 2 months, and saying, okay, where are we right now? How do we work in what we know or what we have established? Because beyond what we were seeing in consumer behaviors, our brands were coming up with major hurdles of furlough. Are their teams the way that they used to be? So we were facing adversity that I don't think that many even could prepare for, given both of the sides of how does the consumer actually buy, but how are our teams staying intact? And so the ones that were really, I thought, doing a really nice job was when they kind of pivoted into this, maybe a charitable offering or charity sentiment or going to a DIY tip, home inspiration, for cause. The content messaging, I think, took it one of its biggest turns because it was no longer really good enough to send your 2 to 3 digital touch points a day around a product when the whole world around you is changing and people are adapting. And the brands that really soften that tone and humanize themselves, I think we'll be able to keep their consumer connected, even when they weren't buying or needing to buy something at that moment, because they were maybe a bright spot in their day or something interesting that they were looking forward to, or, hey, I have that, I could redecorate my office, right? And so those were the types of conversations we were having and leading with our customers on how do we get to be really agile so that when next Tuesday something changes again, we can just pivot and respond to it. And that was what was really remarkable about the things that we got to see with the brands, as well as the ways that consumers were interacting with different types of communication.
That's super interesting. I actually just heard that I think we have Shawuan on the line now. Is that correct?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. I'm just if you guys don't mind, could you just briefly introduce yourself and your title, and so that folks can know who you are, and then I'll ask you a quick follow up.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Shawuan Johnson. I am the Executive Vice President of Merchandising for Tommy Hilfiger company stores in North America. Happy to be with everyone today.
Cool. So we were just talking about marketing messages and how they changed since the pandemic began, and even over the past few months. And Courtney had some great comments around that. Can you talk a little bit about how your marketing messages may have changed?
Yeah, absolutely. When our stores closed back in March, we had to quickly pivot the messaging to highlight our online offer, and we really focused even on those customers in our database who historically had only shopped with us in our physical locations. It was about really enticing them to shift to online. From a product messaging standpoint, we really focused on what I call, the 3 C's. Care. Customers really wanted to take care of themselves and their families, and it was really important for us to message how we were going to do that when they entered in our stores. From a product perspective, the other C is really about comfort. I think this was noted before, but our team focused on highlighting products that amplify comfort, versatility. People were working from home, juggling, teaching their children, and we really wanted to make sure that we highlighted those products that would fit their needs, and for those that also just wanted to lounge on the couch and watch Netflix. And then the last C really is about connection. With all the macro uncertainty, it is important for us to communicate directly to our database and our consumers about what is happening out there in the world, and to also make a stance on what we believe as a company in terms of the values that we have, and ensure that our customers understood that.
Cool. Yeah, interesting. I had heard about the comfort being a big topic. I remember where I heard that the term stretch became really popular right now. Stretch to either stretching fabric or stretch type clothing. Okay, so moving on, and Stephen, maybe you can kind of chime in on this a little bit. And if Shawuan just spoke about merchandising. Have you noticed that there's any different products that you had planned for pre-COVID, and are you focusing on different ones now?
Sure. So, so we approach this kind of in 2 ways, right? I do think that one, we actually were merchandising a lot more of our seller tools, meaning, our platform is fundamentally about how can people make money off of the goods that they have. And so we really thought through how do we, accelerate maybe some of the tools or highlight some of the tools that help people sell online, whether it's the way that they can feature their products, how to photograph their products. We actually launched a feature called Posh Stories, which is a video selling tool to allow people to actually make their merchandise come to life in a 3D way. But separate from the external merchandising, I will say to what I had said earlier, we were looking at the trends that users themselves were kind of telling us. So I think even before loungewear was kind of becoming big, we actually saw a lot of that, and we're featuring the items on the platform that people were selling, and really trying to think through also, and I will say this, how to be mindful of time when probably, at some point we normally would do festival wear merchandising, and the fact that all that had just suddenly changed, really it was like, oh wait, hold on, let's think through all of the merchandising strategy that we normally would apply, but now may not actually work, but how can we put a twist on it? And whether or not do you want to do, Coachella yourself from home? How do you still kind of try to be smart and market those experiences? Because I do think there's an element that people want this, but maybe, how do you capitalize on that emotional attachment? Because I do think that there is that element that happens out there.
Yes, totally. Let's see. And by the way, I just wanted to let folks know that if they have a question, please send it in the text box. We're happy to answer them. So let's talk a little bit about retention and acquisition. Those are such hot topics around whenever you think about marketing, that's what you think of. Have you noticed that there's been a shift in your budgeting for retention versus acquisition? I'd love to get that perspective. Mike, maybe you can jump in there.
Yeah, I mean, that's something we're pretty sensitive to because it's practically impossible to make acquisition costs back on a single bag of coffee, and we sell coffee 1 bag at a time. And so if we're not in it for retention, we're really not in it to make money. I think that one of the things that we dabbled with, like we experimented with the 5-pound bag of coffee because it was something that our roasters were good at selling because they sell it in their wholesale business. And then we knew there were a lot of consumers stocking up in March and April. And in the heat of everything, the judgment we made was actually not to try to whip up a very different revenue or life cycle stream, just because the lifetime value implications would be so unpredictable. And we put more energy into merchandising the things that did have a grounding in lifetime value that we could predict and nurture through our normal retention marketing. Even as small a business as we are, that was just too unpredictable for us to spend ad dollars against at a time when everything was so volatile. So I think one of the takeaways from the last 90 to 120 days has been to take the tried and true retention drivers and adapt them to what's going on versus throwing completely new stuff at the wall. Just because I think, at least having been in a couple retention businesses now, retention-driven businesses, I should say, the read you get on the first 90 or 120 days of revenue can be really misleading. And if you start to spend money out 1 year, 2 year LTVs, extrapolating on what you learn in a 45 or a 60 or a 90-day stretch in times like these, that can be really scary. So I think what proved out was we probably left a little bit of revenue on the table where we weren't putting like 10 pounds of coffee in people's basements in giant numbers, but we did have an opportunity to create relationships with customers that were interested in making coffee at home differently now that their lifestyles have changed. And it's seeming so far that those investments are pretty solid.
Interesting. Courtney, do you want to jump in?
Yeah. Don't go. I go to Stephen next. We saw a huge surplus in first-time buyers among our customer base from a whole, especially for those that were more majority sold in your big box, whether it be Target or Walmart or Nordstrom. And so what we worked with brands on is they had this opportunity for an individual to get to know them. For instance, Native Shoes, they've sold majority through brick and mortar for many, many years and done very well. They were getting first-time buyers coming through the door that they had never met before. And we used it as an opportunity that through this time we get to know who their buyer was in a way that they didn't have that opportunity, and then be able to personalize the experience around that. Maybe this individual's only bought this one face cream the whole time. How do we introduce them to the plethora of brand properties? Or how do we introduce the Native Shoes, who is a children's brand in most people's mind, that they actually have women's and men's shoes? And so we just tried to lean in and use our team support to help supplement other groups within their orgs to say, let's take this as an opportunity and a gift and get to know the consumer that we haven't necessarily been able to meet directly before. And we saw a lot of pivot in how do we get to that second, third, fourth purchase. And not just that, but how do we then introduce her to buying and all the benefits of the brand directly versus what they may have only known through a third party before?
Stephen, do you want to just join into that one? And I actually think this is our time for our last question, unfortunately. So Stephen, do you want to add some?
Sure. So I think similar to what Mike had said, retention obviously is an incredibly important vehicle right now, I think, for a lot of brands, especially because kind of rediscovering and sort of bringing back your old users who may have not engaged in the past, especially when things have changed, makes more sense because you have a lot more information on them to sort of serve up the right kind of merchandise or even products. I will say that one thing that's been really challenging, and I think it's across the board for many companies, is to think through what is the value of a new customer, right? Like someone you're acquiring right now, even the data you're getting is just so, I would say, specious because everyone is acting so different. That even just looking at the models you have and kind of redefining those models and saying, hey, whatever our old user acquisition models might be, you almost have to put aside and kind of rethink because the landscape has completely changed. And really saying, is 6 weeks of data enough to predict what you want to get in the future? Or do you need longer? Do you want to even say, hey, this is just a one-time experience that you might need to even redo it again as we move forward into the year? I think that's happened a lot just because all the auction ecosystems have also changed and are still changing, that it's almost moving targets on a constant basis. But what you can count on is your existing customers to come back and really giving them the value, because that I think is where there's always a better investment in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great way to end it as well. Value is so important, especially nowadays.